A warm welcome. You're watching the big India Today-CII post-budget roundtable. There were very high expectations of this budget. What's the view in India Inc.? Has Nirmala Sitharaman been able to deliver? The first question I'll take on this India Today-CII budget roundtable is, has the budget done enough to be able to kickstart the private investment cycle? Remember, data that came out recently suggests that investment is at a 15-year low. There's been a lot of talk about reviving the animal spirits of India Inc. Has that happened adequately in this budget? I want to introduce the special guests joining us for this one-hour discussion, starting with Suman Sinha, one of the top voices on renewable energy. Flanking him, we've got TV Narendran of Tata Steel, Chandrajit Banerjee, the man who knows it all. This is where India Inc. comes together. He has views and feedback from different sectors of the industry. To my right, a special guest. You got two brothers on two opposite sides of the divide, or let's see if they're on the same side of the divide. We'll find out soon. Jayant Sinha, Member of Parliament. Flanking him, Shashi Tharoor. Nice to see him. Talking this time about economics, and that's going to be as sharp as his commentary on politics. Shobna Kamineni joins us as well. So let me start by asking you, Suman Sinha, has the budget, in your view, done enough to give the signal to industry which you were looking for after this big election mandate for Narendra Modi, that they're serious about trying to enthuse private industry to invest big time in the India story?
So Rahul, thanks a lot. I think certainly if you sort of go back and think about the FM speech, a large part of the initial section was focused on how to develop the infrastructure, how to revive animal spirits. They set a target of the $5 trillion economy in the next 5 years. So I think all of that was meant to show the government's commitment to grow the economy quite significantly going forward. I think the question is, of course, was there enough in the budget after that to justify those targets that were set? And I think what they did is they looked at, if you look at specific areas, I think infrastructure was a big area where, where there's a lot of discussion, a lot of steps were mooted in that. I think they talked about one grid for power, for water, for roads, for gas and so on. So a lot of fairly interesting ideas were there. I think looking at the infrastructure, they also announced a spend of about close to 1.5 trillion over the next 5 years, fairly large. The question is, where's the financing going to come from? And there I think there was a lot of effort done on the financing side to address...
And that's something, gents, we didn't fully understand. Why is it in a budget we didn't see what the allocations were? That's the one thing you look out for. The government signaling its intent, but tell us how much money will you put behind each of the sectors? For the first time we didn't have that. Why?
There was really no need to get into that, Rahul. I mean, this is a modern, bold budget for the 21st century. And it provides the action plan for the $5 trillion economy. And so that had to be laid out. And of course, the Honorable Finance Minister spoke for 2 hours and 15 minutes in a very, very animated and in a very, very bold, forward-looking way. And all the necessary detail is there in the appendix. I mean, anybody who wants to study it, all the documents are there. We can go through them in detail in this discussion as well. But the numbers add up. And that, for us, who look at these numbers closely, is very reassuring. The expenditure goes up, but at the same time, revenues also go up in a reasonable way. All the numbers seem quite reasonable. And most importantly, the fiscal deficit is being brought down to 3.3%, which provides relief when it comes to government borrowing, will bring down interest rates further, along with the positioning that the RBI is doing. All of this, coming back to the point that you were asking about earlier, Rahul, is about unleashing animal spirits. And I think what this very, very bold and forward-looking budget does is it provides a tremendous jump start for the unleashing of these animal spirits.
The government wants to unleash animal spirits, but unless the animal spirits are genuinely unleashed, just prodding those animal spirits on isn't going to work. Does this budget, in your view, do enough to give the confidence to India Inc. that, okay, let's start putting our money where our mouth is?
So I think India Inc. Has been investing because it believes in the long-term future of the country. So I think that story continues, right? The focus on infrastructure certainly helps because it not only spurs demand, but it also helps bring down the cost of doing business. How do you fund that was always been a question, as Suman said, that has got addressed in some sense. Getting private capital into railways, which has been a big bottleneck for industry, I think is very positive, not only in rolling stock, but also in tracks. So there are many positives, include a more inclusive rural economy, MSME sector, etc. I think what corporate India would have liked to see a bit more is on the tax side. maybe a little bit more incentives for investments. I don't think we saw enough of that because ultimately the private sector has to invest.
Is the government still scared of that suit boot ki jibe, suit boot ki sarkar jibe that Rahul Gandhi threw, the one attack that actually hit and hurt? Because this whole business of trying to reduce corporate taxes to 25% should have happened by now for all companies, because especially the bigger companies are the ones that actually do the majority of the employment. Shashi Tharoor, that's where you've hit in a manner that the government is still hurting and they're very scared of that image.
Good for them, they should be. But let me go back to Jan's rather positive take on the budget, Jan, which took me aback a little bit, because in fact the real problem with this budget is there are no numbers to add up. He says the numbers add up. She didn't give very many. There was zero reference to the macroeconomic picture. She didn't mention GDP growth, nothing to justify the rather optimistic and rosy scenario portrayed in the economic survey. She threw in the fiscal deficit number at the very end of the speech, and she mentioned the same 3.3% that they mentioned last year and failed to meet. So why should we be encouraged by a number like that, which is a target they haven't met? Throughout the 5 years of the last government, including when my dear friend Jayant was in that ministry, they have not been able to meet their revenue projections. So immediately what has happened is that by the time you come down to the end of the fiscal, you've actually
But they're
spent
keeping a
less
tighter
on
leash on
social
deficits
sector.
than your government ever did, Dr.
Yeah, but the animal spirit's where the leash really is. I mean, the leash is on that animal, poor thing. It's not able to break free at all. Look at the private sector investment point, for example, that you made. According to the figures I've seen, the last quarter was 81% down from the previous quarter and 87% down from the same quarter last year of private investment. So obviously, even though Mr. Narendra very bravely said India Inc. believes in the future, they're not investing, they're not putting their money where their mouth is. So they'll have to tell us if this budget suddenly gives them so much encouragement that they're suddenly going to go back that 81% and put more money into the Indian economy that may generate jobs. It's striking she didn't talk about jobs. The only reference to labor, there's a lot of reference to capital. The only reference to labor was when she said she'd codify all the laws into 4 codes. We still don't know what that's going to imply and what the content would be. But for a person who doesn't have a job, a labor law doesn't yet apply. What he wants is a job. And there was really no indication in this 2-hour speech
you've been hearing from
how the
different
jobs will be created.
corporate head honchos who have been saying that there is a certain sense of fear as well. Dar lagta hai for various reasons. Agencies being on the loose, the fact that there was political uncertainty before the verdict came out. Do you believe this budget has done enough in terms of signaling and messaging to India Inc. Okay, start investing once again so we can have more jobs?
So, you know, one of the things which actually inhibited private sector investment was this huge thing that we have been talking about, the trust deficit, so to say. And yes, of course, the huge power that the taxman really had or have in the country. Now, having said that, one of the things which I really appreciate in the budget is that there has been a strong recognition that that industry would actually bring in wealth for the country. It creates wealth and it creates livelihood. And I think the finance minister at the beginning of the speech was very, very clear about that. That was great. That was great to hear that acknowledgement.
But she didn't follow that, Abhikram Kulos.
No,
reducing corporate taxes for the really big companies, which would have given them some kind of headroom and maybe urge them and encourage them to invest some more?
Yes, of course. One of the strongest demands of CII has been for some time now, bring corporate tax down to 18%, but also remove all exemptions. And also remove all exemptions. So we would like to see a roadmap towards that. And that you have more convergence to our 25% is what we would see as a sort of a move towards that direction. You have included many more. Yes, but the numbers, as you said, would come from the others. But one very important thing, a couple of very significant things done in the budget, one must say. One of the biggest issues that was hurting industry was liquidity. And we talked about liquidity. The focus on the NBFC sector and the focus on the banks is an important thing that she has done. And it's a big important signal because the real sector was actually today being hurt more also by the financial sector. And we need a lot of corrections on the financial sector side. And many things that we have got over the last many years. We have got used to thinking that the budget will do everything for us. And I think we have to see many things that need to be now done outside of the budget, where the budget has set certain...
But has it done enough, Mr. Kirloskar, in your view, to suggest to private industry that this government is serious about restoring that trust, that bridge that got broken in some fashion and getting India in to start investing?
Well, you know, the bridge is always a two-way street. It's not just government. It's industry to government, industry to society. And we as an industry as well, we have to work to make sure that we build the bridge. From CII side, we are working very hard to see how we can rebuild a trust bridge with the government. And I think there are a couple of things in the budget. One was she talked about the trust, since we had talked with her about the trust deficit. I think they brought it up, and in all fairness, with all the ministers that I met in the last 1 week, we brought this trust deficit up, and all of them said, no, we trust you and we want to make sure that issue is removed. That was the message that was very clearly given to me. And there's some things like faceless income tax. I think these are indications. Taking all the old GST cases and closing them through some device, so you can go ahead. Because GST on its own is running pretty well, at least for the automotive sector, it's running very, very well. Organized sector is running well. So taking and closing these cases. I think some of these are indications that there is a seriousness about changing the trust deficit.
Okay,
And
Mr. Munjal, do you believe private sector is enthused adequately enough to start? Mr. Narendra said we believe in the India story, that's all well and good, but India Inc. isn't investing enough in the India story at this moment. Will this change after this budget?
So, the Indian industry will only invest when consumption and demand picks up. So, one of the issues with this, as you know, we have two engines on which the entire economy fires. One is capital formation and second is consumption. Now, private sector has not been investing for a while now. We have had investment from the public sector. So, the overall gross capital formation has been negative now for 14 quarters, barring 2 quarters, 1.5 quarters, I think. So, that's something which was a concern already. And with the last 2 quarters consumption having fallen, this has become a bigger challenge for investment, because unless capacity utilization increases, you're not likely to see additional investments come into capex. So, if the NBFC issue can be resolved, if the banks become less risk averse, she did incidentally talk about these. The action, and it's not quite clear how they're going to do it, but I hope they will do it. She said some of this stuff is in fine print in the annexures. But this is a real issue right now facing India and Indian industry.
So let me take that question then. The next question on this roundtable, does this budget do enough to revive consumption? Private consumption has been going down. Jen Sinha, we'll start with you. There's been a slide. For example, in the automobile sector, there's been a double-digit slide for 3 straight months. What is it that you think the budget does to get consumers to start investing? Because it's not just India Inc. which has some kind of a trust deficit, even consumers aren't spending.
So there are 3 massive drivers for consumption in this budget and in the government policies. Of course, Shashi has a way with words. He certainly doesn't have the same knack for numbers. The numbers are all there, the numbers all add up, and they're right here, as I said, in the budget and a glance and all the annexures. So if Shashi thinks that you can prepare a budget and release it to the general public and to business, the community, without having the numbers all there fully buttoned up by sector, I think he should take a look at all the details we've provided, all the documentation we've provided. But 3 massive drivers for consumption. First and foremost is interest rates. We have very high real interest rates in India. Obviously, the RBI is moving to an accommodative stand. We are providing through our fiscal policies the room for RBI to cut. The general government borrowings are going to come down. Interest rates are going to come down. That's going to unleash consumption. 1. 2, obviously credit has to flow in the economy. For credit to flow in the economy, we need the banks and the NBFCs to lend. Now, we can spend a lot of time talking about what it is we have done to comprehensively address both the banking and the NBFC situation, but the 70,000 crores to the banks, the 1 lakh crore credit loss guarantee, those are all measures to stimulate credit flow. And number 3, we've taken 2 very important areas of the economy that are fundamentally areas that are very high multiplier effects: affordable housing and automotive, and provided massive stimulus there. Affordable housing, we've really made it possible for you to go out and buy flats, because we're giving this interest deduction, and it adds up to quite a bit of money, about 7.5 lakhs, as the Honorable Finance Minister said. And in addition to that, the benefits that we're providing to electric vehicles, both on the supply side, which is the factory side, as well as on the demand side, in terms of 1.5 lakh rupees worth of subsidies, I think is going to hopefully unleash a wave of purchases when it comes to both two-wheelers, three-wheelers and four-wheelers. So those are two, automobiles and housing.
But the moment you mention electric vehicles, for example, the first question that comes to anybody's mind is, where is the support infrastructure that is required to be able to fire electric vehicles? You're pushing everyone in that direction, but are we even prepared?
But that's exactly the point, because we don't really have either a series of charging stations around the country yet, though she's promised to encourage that through her taxes. But also we don't have reliable supplies of electricity. We may be generating on paper a surplus, but it's not reaching us all. Even living in Lutyens, Delhi, I'm having 5 power cuts a day, and that's the experience in every
Is
Indian
your neighbor
city.
who's a BJP MP also having 5 power cuts?
No, my neighbor is a military officer, so I suppose he probably compensates. But let me come back to the point that you asked about consumption. It's very important, because in fact, while Jayant is right, the numbers have been provided, the question has always been about the credibility of those numbers. And it's sad that we've reached a stage where the credibility of the Indian government's claims on everything from GDP to unemployment has been questioned not just inside the country by the opposition, but globally. Look at the sectors we're talking about. She's gone and levied 2 rupees more on every litre of petrol and diesel, 1 rupee cess and 1 rupee excise. Now that 2 rupees doesn't only hurt, as she said in her press conference, people who own personal vehicles. The Aam Aadmi going off to buy his kameez or his chappal, that kameez or chappal has been sent from a factory to the market, to the bazaar, in a truck that uses petrol or diesel. They're going to pass the extra cost on to him. There's going to be a terrible knock-on effect for the ordinary person. I'm not sure that keeping on, we're already paying the highest petrol and fuel prices in the world, charging more to it is not. But let me just finish one more point, because I've got to leave. And that is simply when he mentioned a couple of the other, what was the second example he gave? There was,
He mentioned housing.
Housing. For example, you take housing. Great that you're giving them a good tax break on the 45 lakh, up to 45 lakh houses. But you've also now applied a swinging series of import duties on everything that goes into the house. Flooring, marble, tiling, roofing, even furniture mounting has already been taxed extra than it used to be. Now, obviously it's China that will pay the price. Great, but the reason that China was able to export all these things to India is because the average Indian home buyer found them so much cheaper than the Indian manufactured product. Now, we'd love to support Indian industry, make in India is all very well, but I'm not sure in the end, when the numbers add up, whether the home buyer is going to gain or lose from the 2 sets of taxes on housing.
Shubhnak, I mean, do you think that the tax, the extra duty that's been levied on petrol and diesel, is that retrograde? Because the idea was to move this under the purview of GST. Instead of doing that, you've increased it, which is good for the government in the immediate short run, but has a knock-on spiral effect and everything else.
There's no way that anyone who knows economics or not can actually agree that increased prices will help you. But if you look at it, she had a countervailing argument by saying that crude prices are soft, so maybe they would be able to get some benefit in that. But if you see it in overall, it's not going to help in terms of increasing petrol and diesel prices if it has a pass-through effect. I do think the hope would be is that we move away from such things of being, everyone says that India is so dependent on its energy supplies, that's the one that pulls us down. So when they were talking about waterways, those are the things, waterways, alternate fuel, and when she put that up there, so look at it holistically. When you have a holistic argument, you're suddenly looking at an India which has a future.
So one of the big thrust areas of this government very clearly is to push electric mobility. Let me start with you, Suman Sinha. So you're making petrol, diesel costlier, you're incentivizing people going out and buying electric vehicles. Are we prepared? Is this happening at the right time? Is it happening too soon? Do we not have adequate infrastructure to support the idea?
No, look, I don't think you can say it's too soon at all, because the whole world is moving more and more towards electric vehicles. I think it's an opportunity for India to actually generate an industry or set up an industry where we can actually take leadership in the world. We're already behind China in some of these areas, and it's not just electric vehicles, it's also the battery storage that goes along with it. Now, one of the other interesting things that the Finance Minister talked about was setting up these global manufacturing hubs and incentivizing foreign investors to come into India, doing these global bids and giving people investment credits to set up these manufacturing facilities.
But we know the automobile sector isn't very happy with the manner in which this is being pushed through. Mr. Kirloskar has spoken publicly about that.
I've spoken about electric vehicles. I've talked about what is your end intention. Is it to reduce carbon or reduce energy? If that's the case, tax the reduction of carbon. So lower tax for lower carbon. Let the technology be decided by the customer and the supplier based on what kind of infrastructure is available. To charge a car overnight, that's for 9 hours, you require a 10 kilowatt connection. Most apartments in Bangalore, I know, have 3.7 kilowatts. So if you're saying all in one building, everyone has to change to electric cars from the existing cars, 3.7 kilowatts goes to 10 kilowatts per apartment. Where's the connected load?
And a lot of
that's the
electricity
issue.
generation, Mr. Munjal, is actually through fossil fuels. So you're kind of going around in circles, you're not consuming petrol and diesel, but ultimately it's still a coal-fired power plant. So the problem there.
I think we can argue about this, but the reality is, unless you put the plumbing in place, you're not going to get anywhere. So frankly, I agree with what they're doing at this moment. If you see what has happened over the last few years, so today's budget was interesting. It was unlike a normal budget in a sense. It was a grand vision of what the government would like to see happen in the next 5 to 10 years and where they would like to see India in 10 to 20 years. So that was actually very good, I have to say, because they covered everything from space craft to aviation, MROs to rural infrastructure. The detail that was missing was the numbers which he said are in the annexures. I've not had a look at the annexures right now. But I presume there is enough in there to cover the major areas. As Jayant just pointed out, of banking, of course, she mentioned the 70,000 crores. But there are many other areas where allocations were not mentioned. So I would like to go through the fine print to see what is being done in the immediate. Okay? Because this is a longer term plan that's got announced. So the issue is all about execution here now.
Okay.
The plan sounds
one of
fantastic.
the things the government has promised to do in this year is push through genuine strategic disinvestment. I heard the word participation, which kind of concerned me for a moment, but we did hear
she did
strategic
say very clear. And she said
disinvestment
case by case.
at 1,05,000 crore rupees. Chandrajit
Yeah.
Banerjee, will it finally happen? Jayant Sinha tried very hard to push through the disinvestment of Air India, but some of the things that have been required to make it happen, writing off some of the public sector loans, they couldn't do because in an election there they say, oh, ye suit walon ki madad kar di, CII walon ki madad. So he had that fear. Now with an election won, will they be able to push through?
I think there is no better time than this when they can push this through. And I do not think 1.0, in fact, I would think 1.05 is a conservative number, and it's good that they are having a conservative number, because I would imagine you can go beyond if you are well targeted, if you are well organized. And I think at this point in time, this is the right time for us to move ahead. And it's something that we have been talking for quite some time, and a huge possibility, and that would really be a huge solution.
Will the opposition jump around and say that they're trying to sell off, because you can't even call BSNL and Air India family jewels any longer. That's the problem. That's one problem.
The family millstones.
Yeah, the family millstones.
Shashi didn't have a good experience
they
with Air India recently.
They talked about it too, actually.
Yeah.
Congress spoke about selling them too.
No, but nothing happened. So my concern is
the right time.
with the opposition not knowing who the Congress president is to start with, and don't worry, you won't get you in on that. Will we at least see the government muster some political courage to push through this time?
Of course.
You couldn't do it last time.
There is enough
Of
political
course, we were
mileage
going to
available
do
right
it,
now.
Rahul. We were going to do it. It's just that when you have this kind of a situation, you need, if you're a seller, you need buyers. If the buyers don't show up, you can't.
If they didn't show up last time, why do you think they'll show up this time?
Obviously, we have said that we are going to reconsider the terms of the offer and make it even more attractive so that the buyers do show up. So obviously the strategic intent is there, the commitment is fully there. We have put the target in the budget also, 1,05,000 crores. So we are going to go ahead and do it, and we are going to do it in a way that makes it possible for us to attract viable buyers in this regard.
Dr. Tharoor, the problem is with the opposition and the manner in which it reacts. If some of the loans are written off, and every year you're pumping in 25,000 odd crore rupees, which isn't making sense. If the opposition doesn't overreact to things like that, then the government can actually push through.
Look, I can't speak for the party yet. I don't think the party has formulated a final stance on any of this. So personally, I can see some merit in going with a reasonable amount of disinvestment. But again, as Jayant rightly said, you need sellers. You need buyers for every seller. And the real question is whether these conditions, she did insist on 51%, for example. It'll no longer be just government 51%, but government plus public sector companies will hold 51%. Will that be attractive enough for another airline to come in as a 49% shareholder? Only airline CEOs can answer that question.
But that's not the case for Air India. That was a special case for Air India, where we said in the particular offer that we had that we would do 76%, and now of course we're willing to re-examine those terms. But it is for other public sector undertakings that the Honourable Finance Minister said, which is in the budget speech as well, is that on a case-by-case basis we would be willing to go below 51% if other government entities also held a stake, so that we would still be over 51%.
Do you see a fundamental pivot here towards genuine disinvestment, which we didn't see, Mr. Munjal, in the last 5 years?
So first, I would hope so. And then, as we are hearing from Jayant, so the thing is, Air India is a very interesting opportunity. It has some of the best landing rights, for example. It has some very good assets. It also has massive liabilities. So unless you're able to give somebody a clean asset, most people are scared not just of the liabilities, of what else might be in there. Because you don't know. This is an existing operating company. Even when you go and acquire, forget a government company, even if it's a private company, your diligence actually focuses on what's been going on earlier. You want to know the future potential, and that's for you to operate in. But at the same time, you want to make sure there's not something that's going to come and bite you later on. So that's the one thing which the government needs to make sure you insulate any new buyer from past, whatever, misdeeds, sins, whatever has happened in the entity.
Has the government, Mr. Narendra, left that soot boot ki sarkar notion behind them, or is that a fear that still plagues their actions?
I think the finance minister started complimenting industry. I think that was a good beginning. I thought that gave a signal that yes, the trust issue is getting sorted out a bit. Because ultimately, I think you need government, you need industry, you need everyone to work together. I don't think anyone individually can solve the problem. And it's important that the industry and the government works together to find solutions.
Mr. Banerjee, will anybody come forth to buy the likes of BSNL, the likes of Air India, if they offered without past liabilities being written off?
I think that's the point. I think Mr. Sinha mentioned it very clearly. Actually, if we can make it attractive, if we can see, and the point that Mr. Munjal was mentioning, that we need to make it attractive in seeing that the liability, the type of liabilities that we inflict on is something which the private sector obviously won't be ever incentivized.
Mr. Anand Mahindra was asked very recently on Twitter, why don't you come in and buy Air India? He says, so, how do you become a millionaire? He says, if a billionaire buys an airline, he ends up a millionaire. Mr. Kirloskar, do you see adequate interest in private sector to actually come forth and buy some of this millstone that's lying around?
I don't know about the millstones, but there are a lot of other assets which are very, very attractive. There are a lot of good companies which have been there for many years with good assets. I think they can do even better. They can become global companies.
That's a good point you make, Sir. I think this is an important point. Sell what people want to buy, as opposed to thrust down their throats what they're not interested in.
See, what you want.
Fastest growing aviation sector in the world at this moment.
Yeah, but Air India is, like he said,
in the fastest growing aviation sector in the world at this moment.
A big hole now with Jet not there.
Yes.
Well, one more thing the finance minister talked about was actually selling brownfield.
Will you come in?
So it's not about me or who will come in, but it is an opportunity. As I said, if it's packaged right, I actually agree with Jayant. If it's packaged right, it is saleable today.
There are several that the private sector would be interested in. For years, we have talked about one of the best areas in Lutyens, Delhi. We talk about the Ashoka Hotel. We have not been able to move on it. So there are various things which the private sector will be
and
attracted
there are lots
towards.
of brownfield assets as well that the finance minister has talked about selling through things like REITs and InvITs. So those are also things that can be monetized. So I think if the government actually looks at the asset register, sees the assets that they have, there's probably a lot of things that they can actually liquidate and sell. And also keep one more thing in mind. Selling assets like BSNL, even if you sell it at a fairly low price, it probably saves you from investing 25,000 crores every year to support the asset.
But what is it that people would frankly be interested in? Mostly the land parcels and the land assets
it depends on the
and some of
asset.
the cable infrastructure that they've got.
So I don't know in the case of BSNL exactly what the assets might be, but I think it's a case-to-case situation. In different entities, the assets would be different. And to that extent, in some of them it could be landing rights, in some of them it could be actually be buildings. In the case of Ashoka Hotel, obviously prime land in Delhi. So it could be various different things and different assets. And I think
but some of this has been said. The one disappointment last 5 years was that when it came to disinvestment, you did some jugaad. One government company buying stake in another. Now you know that better than anybody else. That's not real disinvestment.
Rahul, you have to be very practical in these matters. As I said, when it came to Air India, we put up a very fair, a reasonably attractive offer for sale, but we didn't have the buyers. Similarly, when we look at some of the other opportunities, we have to make sure that there is a liquid market on the other side. Again, from a government point of view, if you have a situation where you have only one bidder, that also doesn't work. So we have to be practical in terms of who's willing to put in money, how much money they're willing to put in, and then do what is feasible and realistic. And of course, we are fully seized with this matter, and we are exploring a variety of ways to raise disinvestment proceeds, which we have done, for example, with the ETFs, which is a very creative way of coming up with disinvestment proceeds. So all of these alternatives are on the table, all are being considered. The government has been very open to evaluating these alternatives, and of course, with the target being 1,05,000 crores, we will be moving forward.
But not through jugaad, through real disinvestment.
What you call jugaad, I mean, you're using a pejorative word, Rahul. The reality is that when it comes to buying and selling of assets, you have to be practical in terms of what it is that you can work with the market to do.
Is disinvestment still politically taboo after the Vajpayee experience, Dr. Thirumani?
No, I think there'll be some openness to it. Certainly there are some in my party who have expressed a faith that this, if done right, this may be necessary for the health of the overall economy. But this business of one public sector company buying shares in another public sector company is honestly pointless. You're just transferring the assets and the liabilities from one book to another, and we saw too much of that in the last government. In fact, because in the first couple of years they completely failed to meet their disinvestment targets. They had very ambitious numbers in the budget. I think the first year was 99,000 crores and they ended up with zero. Second year was not much better. Then they started doing this instead.
But now there is some desperation.
Exercise.
In India, very often we see with any kind of reform, unless it reaches a point of desperation, the government doesn't push through. Now, if they don't, with their ambitious welfare agenda, if they don't bring in genuine disinvestment to the table, where will they get the money from? So there is some compulsion there as well.
I agree that there's pressure on all sides where consumption is low. The new investments are lacking. Internationally, there's a whole lot of global changes that are happening, you know, trade winds that are going to make exports tough. So this is the best card that they have. They need to, and this is something that is there. They can exercise it well. So I have hope that there'll be some good assets, and that's when private sector, Vikram has continuously been talking about equity coming into play. And this is where the private sector will find the equity, and banks will start backing good assets or the ability to turn these bad ones into good. So money will come, and I think that when you talked about animal spirits, that is something that will help. The only animal that she spoke about was the elephant, the story of the elephant, and that's one that rampage we want to stop.
So the image that you wanted to draw was that of East Asian tiger. Not like this one doddering.
No, we want that elephant rampage to stop.
But there is also one other unique opportunity which I think can be tapped. One is complete companies. Second is you can pick up individual units, projects, divisions, which are again saleable. And the third is land parcels. There are large land parcels with public sector enterprises, with the defense, with the railways, which are not being utilized and unlikely to be utilized for the next 30 to 50 years. It's very easy to identify those and use those for specified purposes. Industry, educational institutions, hospitals, low-cost housing, very, very easy. Because today, to get land for any of these is not just painful, it's expensive.
Last
very
budget
expensive.
we spoke about a bank. CII put that idea about creating that land, to create it as a land bank.
So in the last
Yeah.
part of this conversation, I want to focus on whether this budget does enough to meet the 7% GDP growth rate target that had been laid out by the economic survey. Remember, the last time we saw GDP numbers, the economy was growing only at 5.8%. Every data set that we've seen over the past few weeks suggests that the slowdown still continues. It could get worse when the Q1 numbers come out. Therefore, can we bounce back fast enough to hit 7%? I'll start by asking Mr. Kirloskar.
Well, the auto sector is certainly a challenge. It has been a tough, I think, 6-8 months going on. This is the longest stretch we've seen. We've had a great play for last 5 years.
Why do you think people aren't buying automobiles?
Well, listen, it's a little hard question to answer because I don't have enough data. And the data which I don't have is on metro and shared mobility. Okay, I'm not sure whether actually mobility has come down. But we are seeing people
in
driving.
which case, the government may not be to blame for this.
No,
If
no, no, this is
youngsters
good. No.
are not buying cars
No, no, but this is
because they
good.
think it's better to be
Listen,
in an Uber or
listen,
an Ola.
listen,
Then you
listen.
can't blame Jayant,
No, I'm
Sinha,
not blaming.
Modi
I'm
and
not
Nirmala
blaming.
Sitharaman for
I'm
that.
not blaming. That's why I said I don't have the data. If it is metro, because from 2 metro cities to 18 metro cities and shared mobility, it's good for the country. It means we're using less energy, we are creating less pollution, and it'll stabilize at a different level. Okay, so this is good. I have no particular issue. In fact, this is a better way to go than pumping money into maybe electric or anything else. Metro is a much better way to go. It's far more
Jayant
efficient.
Sinha, the automobile sector has in some senses become like this one sector everyone's now looking at to suggest that consumption is actually coming. Do you believe that there are factors beyond the control of these auto majors to be able to revive that consumption demand?
No, that's exactly right, Rahul. And Mr. Kirloskar also is correct that we can't come to any simplistic conclusions about it. Obviously, we've had a situation where credit has tightened, which has made consumer durables like motorcycles and cars more difficult to purchase. Interest rates have been high, so EMIs have been high for them. And that's another reason why, there's been a softening of demand. But there are also substitutes. Now, whether it is ride sharing, whether it's metros, whether it's, railways, all of these are also alternative ways of getting mobility. And so we have to look at all of that and try and understand what is it that's actually driving this. It's probably, as always is in these situations, a combination of factors that's driving this. I think when interest rates come down, we'll see again all of these cars and motorcycles being purchased at higher rates. But the growth rate in the future is unlikely to be as high as it has been in the past because of these alternate forms of transportation.
Mr. Munjal, has the automobile sector hit a peak from where we'll only fall? Because every month when
I don't think so.
numbers come out,
I don't think so.
There's a lot of headroom.
I have a different view.
But Vikram, the emission
Yeah.
norms are also changing next
Emissions
year.
are
Yeah, yeah,
So a
yeah.
lot of
That's-
people are holding back and figuring,
I think there are a lot of
So
people
we're in
who-
that,
automobiles in India is
we're
very low
also in
right
the
now.
cusp of that change.
Yeah, so as with everything
So I
else,
think
it's going to...
two things are driving this. One is whenever the economy is slow or there's any uncertainty, people defer what is a discretionary purchase. Okay, this is not the first time it's happened. It's happened every time there is some uncertainty or a potential of a slowdown or an actual slowdown. People will push these back. We used to see this all the time in our two-wheeler businesses and even in bicycle, by the way, used to see this in the old days. Second is funding of these sale attached to funding is the norm. So as the NBFCs have kind of got squeezed out, that has had a major impact on people's ability to go out and buy. So I think the combination of these two is pushing back the demand. It's not getting cancelled. My view on it is a little bit different from Vikram's on this, that the growth in metro, frankly, metro has been around for a while. The growth in the last couple of years is not that much to have the kind of
Ola,
impact.
Uber?
So there are three things which are happening. Okay, Ola, Uber will certainly have an impact. And this will be a continued impact. It's not a one-time thing, to the point that Jayant just made. But the overall demand, I think, will still continue. We are still 10 to 12 to 15 years away from the demand actually dropping to single digit or below, low single digits.
I agree.
Okay, so let me ask you this, Mr. Narendran. Do you believe that the 7% growth target that was laid out will be met given what we've seen in the budget, or do we now need to see multiple other executive actions outside of the budget to be able to hit that target?
I think a lot of what was said in the budget needs to be done. A lot what is not said also needs to be done. So I think both are required. Government expenditure needs to happen. Private sector investments is not controlled by the government. The conditions have to create that. And getting liquidity into the system is key. I think here again some actions have been taken by RBI and the government, and that needs to flow into the economy.
Mr. Banerjee.
I think there is a lot which is being done for consumption demand, and I think that itself will trigger, and I see 7% growth not being to be a reality. I see, much of it, the auto sector that we talked about, were also, liquidity in terms of whether consumer was being able to access or get loan. I think addressing the NBFC sector, addressing the liquidity is a very key element in this. There has been a lot of easing of investment or procedures, which itself facilitates investment. That's a very important step which has been taken. So I do not see 7% to be a challenge. 7%. I would have felt that yes, we should have much stronger targets. 7% as is achievable. We need to go to 8%. The challenge is moving to 8% growth to fulfill $5 trillion economy.
Do you believe the economy slowed down and hit a bottom and will bounce back?
I think so. I think, look, there was the uncertainty of the elections as well. As Sunil said, a lot of discretionary purchases were postponed. I think now that the government has come back with a stronger majority and they're now firmly in the saddle, you know, they're taking a lot of the steps that need to be taken, especially on the financing side. I think all of that is going to reflect finally in demand beginning to trough out and starting to pick up again. And I won't be surprised if we start, you know, if we end the year with closer to 7.5 to 8% growth in the last quarter, just like we started the last financial year with about 8% growth in the first quarter. Then we went down. I think we've hit the trough and probably start going up again. So I think that's the general feeling that most of us would have.
Last words, James. How confident are you that that 7% target will indeed be hit?
7% is a given, Rahul, and we have no doubts at all that we'll hit 7% exactly. As Sumant was saying, we've gone through the election period, we've gone through a little bit of a tightening because of the NBFC credit situation and so on. Once we get out of that, 7% is easily realizable. That's not the real growth rate of the economy. The real growth rate of the economy is 8 or 9% once we can get all the growth cylinders to fire. What this budget has done is enabled those growth cylinders to really get started. Again, I will draw your attention to the fact that two very core sectors of the economy, automotive and affordable housing, have got a very big stimulus. We've opened up the economy further. We've addressed the credit and interest rate issues. Government's spending, government's revenue projections are all very conservative. We're going to create less pressure in terms of borrowings from the market, which is going to further bring down rates. All of this is going to get to a point where we should easily be able to hit 8 or 9% growth, and that's when we are going to be able to realize the $5 trillion target that we have. So, as I said, you know, in the economic survey, we got a blueprint. Today with the budget, we've got the action plan for the $5 trillion economy.
Actually, we have to be a little bit more ambitious, I think, as a nation, because our challenges are different from many other developed countries. So if we are not growing at 8+, then we are actually hurting ourselves. Our attempt now has to be, if we can remove the bottlenecks, how do we grow beyond 10%? So we have to focus on about 10%.
Bringing this to an end, I think it's important to say that while everybody said the right thing, we have to appreciate this was the first woman that delivered a budget.
Absolutely.
So let's give some
And by the way,
credit
she
there.
changed the norm.
And the Kennedy-like statement that she said, that it's no longer about what's right, but it's your duty. And that duty is the one that will get us to the $5 trillion.
Oh, absolutely. You know, you had men taking care of the nation's account for a long time. Now you got a woman in charge. This has been a very interesting conversation. I want to thank all our guests for joining us here at the India Today CII Post-Budget Roundtable. A big thank you to all of you. A lot more on the other side. Stay with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks for watching the video. For more such news and updates, please like, share and subscribe to India Today. Also check out our other great videos from our channel. We know you would love to.